From Genesis chapter 37. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him an ornamented robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Joseph said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. He had another dream and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow down to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him at a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in this wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornamented robe that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. I've started to make a list, and here's what I have on it so far. Number one, he was on his phone and his laptop way too much. Number two, he was obsessed with his work. Number three, he made me brush my teeth every night and every morning. Now, I'm sure I'm going to add to this list through the years, but this is my working list for topics that our 2-year-old Clementine will need to talk with her therapist about when she's older, about her father. I'm assuming we're not going to wind up as the world's first perfect parents, and so Clementine will have plenty to chat about. And given that we all have families of some sort, be they blood families or chosen families, we know that no matter how loving they might be, there is inevitable family dysfunction. For some of us, that dysfunction may have elevated to the level of abusive or toxic relationships, sadly. Maybe we experienced alcoholic parents, or that dysfunction can manifest in the present if any of us have family members that we no longer speak with. Our current sermon series is entitled Retold, Sunday School Stories You Thought You Knew, and we're revisiting stories that are frequently contained in children's Bibles or told in Sunday school classrooms and taking a more in-depth look this time around. Often churches are exposed in children in Sunday school to the heroes of the faith in the book of Genesis, such as Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Jacob's sons, including Joseph. But all of these characters are far from the morally upright, shining heroes that we first learn about. Instead, one of the most authentic features of Scripture is that from the beginning, the text does not shy away from revealing the very profound depths of dysfunction in our biblical families. From Adam and Eve's marital strife, to Cain's murder of his own brother, to Noah cursing one of his sons, to Abraham being willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, to Jacob deceiving his father in order to steal his brother's birthright, only to later be deceived by his father-in-law and given the wrong sister in marriage after 7 years of hard labor. The writers of the earliest stories of our faith were upfront that families, even families chosen by God, are full of dysfunction. When we imagine the Joseph that we learned about in Sunday school, we might picture the Donny Osmond look-alike dressed in his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But from the beginning, Joseph's life was anything but amazing. When Joseph's story opens in Genesis chapter 37, we learn that his father Israel, also known as Jacob, loves his son Joseph more than any of his other children. Favoritism is a classic source of family dysfunction. Did anyone here know who was their parents' favorite growing up? Yeah, I see some hands. Maybe you were the favorite. Congratulations. The text says that Jacob loves Joseph because he was the son of his old age, but actually he has a younger son, Benjamin. Instead, the real reason why Joseph is the favorite is because he is the firstborn son of Jacob's favorite wife. If you're unfamiliar with Jacob's story, he falls in love with a woman named Rachel, only to be duped into marrying Rachel's sister Leah as well. And Leah bears 6 sons and 1 daughter, while Rachel remains barren. That prompts Rachel to give her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob as a concubine in hopes of having children that she could raise as her own. And she becomes pregnant twice, the concubine, and that makes Leah jealous, and so she gives Jacob her maidservant Zilpah as a concubine, and Zilpah has 2 more children until finally there are 10 boys and 1 girl at this point, and clearly nothing could go wrong here in this scenario. Rachel then becomes pregnant, and her firstborn is Joseph, Jacob's favorite. The other siblings can clearly see that Joseph is the favorite because their father pampers Joseph while the rest of them are diligently at work in the fields. The other brothers start their workday by using calloused hands to pull on sweaty, smelly, dirt-stained garments over their heads. Their clothes are definitely monochromatic, stitched together with harsh materials that chafe on their skin in the hot sun. Meanwhile, while the other brothers perform hard labor, Joseph just chills at home in his house. And as he lounges, Jacob bestows on Joseph a special ornamented robe given to him by his father. Our translation today called it an ornamented robe. Other translations refer to it as a coat of many colors. That's a phrase we've probably heard before. That phrase comes to us from the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was then translated into Latin and then into English. But actually, scholars don't know what the phrase means at all. So just as we have no idea what fruit Adam and Eve ate in the Garden of Eden, we don't know what this phrase ornamented means. Scholars think that the phrase actually just means it was a robe with long sleeves, which is much less fabulous than an Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But actually the word that is used in Hebrew is used one other time to describe the outfit of King David's daughter, Tamar. 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 18 says, Tamar was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. That's super interesting, right? This is one reason why Joseph is one of the biblical figures that have become icons in the LGBTQ plus community. We know that there were absolutely LGBTQ plus individuals in biblical times. They didn't have the words or labels or concepts that we use today. But the authors let us know that Joseph wore the same kind of robe that princesses wore at the time. In another place in the Joseph story, he is described in our English translations as well-built and handsome. That's what we say in English. But the Hebrew words are actually words that are describing females in other places. So at the very least, Joseph is bending gender stereotypes of his time. Now, while this is all a very cool aspect of Joseph's character, unfortunately, he doesn't do himself any favors with his siblings, who we are told in verse 4, hate him. Joseph begins having dreams, and he decides that he needs to relay those dreams to his brothers. Guess what, guys, he says? I had this dream where we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose up and stood upright while all of your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Isn't that wild? I mean, what do you think it means? His brothers are not amused. Their hatred and fury continue to grow unabated. But Joseph doesn't know how to stop talking. He tells them again, hey guys, guess what? I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were all bowing down to me. Isn't that interesting? What else do you know that counts up to 11? Well, his brothers have had enough at this point, and they hatch a plan. Here comes the dreamer, they say in verse 19. And when Joseph is sent to check up on them, sent by his father, they seize their chance while daddy is away at home. Come now, let us kill him and throw him in one of the cisterns and say that a ferocious animal has devoured them. Then we will see what comes of his dreams. Now, fortunately, one of the brothers reasons with the rest not to kill him, but throw him into a cistern to fool their dad that he's dead. They then decide to sell him into the hands of a caravan of Midianite merchants. Judas betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. These brothers are willing to sell him into captivity for 20 pieces of silver. Inflation, maybe. It's family dysfunction par excellence here. The merchants will eventually arrive in Egypt, where they sell Joseph once again to one of the Egyptian Pharaoh's officials. But while he is in Egypt, Joseph will undergo slavery and sexual harassment and imprisonment before his fortunes finally change. But change they do. And Joseph is able to use his talents as an interpreter of dreams to eventually interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. He becomes second in command of the governance of Egypt. He helps the country prepare for an impending famine, a famine during which his father and brothers go from the land of Israel to Egypt for food, where they have this beautiful moment of reconciliation with Joseph. And as you read through Joseph's tale, you can't help but marvel at this man's persistence and resilience through hardship after hardship. When Jen and I first started at Claremont UCC, it was our first weeks on the job, and we were preparing for our first baptism of a baby who had just been born after we arrived, and Jen was putting together and writing the liturgy for the baptism. Now, actually, Jen writes all of the liturgy, all of the prayers that we pray each week. I just show up on Sundays and try not to mess up what she writes. But I remember that Sunday when I heard her read those words for the very first time, tearing up a little bit. It's the words you heard today. She looked at this child and said, "This child does not yet know the joy of celebration, the fear of failure, or the sting of heartbreak." And it struck me because the reality of this beautiful, innocent child was that life inevitably, just as it has for all of us, will be full of moments of disappointment and hardship and sadness, no matter how much joy might be mixed in with it. We have no idea when a tragedy will hit, or someone will hurt our feelings, or a world events will just crush our spirits. I wish that all of the cute babies that we baptize here could stay wrapped in a little cocoon of protection from all of the pain and the hurt of this world. But that stage of innocence dissipates so quickly when a bully first pushes you down on the playground or someone at school makes fun of you. And then the challenges get harder so quickly as life goes on. And yet somehow, no matter what difficulties we encounter, we are expected, like Joseph, to remain resilient and keep going. If you are able to persist in the face of family dysfunction, that's known in the world of pop culture psychology as being a cycle breaker. I know that some of us here in the sanctuary and folks who are watching online come from really traumatic backgrounds. Some of us have had parents who are alcoholics or addicted to drugs. Some have had abusive parents, both physically and emotionally. Parents who tore you down with biting words, who may have been neglectful or absent, who didn't accept you when you came out to them. Parents who didn't know how to show affection. And yet, despite experiencing that, you were able to grow up and refuse to be consumed by your anger, to have the same poisonous attitude. You made a commitment to loving yourself even when your parents didn't. You promised to show affection to people and to show that they were loved even when you didn't have that modeled yourself. You were a cycle breaker. You were resilient. And we can possess that resilience not just in escaping family dysfunction, but in the face of any kind of hardship. Again, I know that there are people in this room and people watching online today who have had to deal with the death of a spouse or a parent, or horribly, the death of a child. And yet somehow you were able to muster the strength to keep going. I know there are people in this room who have received a diagnosis for themselves or a loved one that completely changed your lives. And yet somehow you were able to keep going. I know people in this room who have struggled financially to make ends meet, who are in terrible car accidents, who have dealt with debilitating depression or anxiety, who have had major doubts about faith and about life, who have experienced dark nights of the soul, who have had to navigate bitter divorces, who have felt unloved and unworthy, who have struggled to find the right job or the right calling, who have felt uncertain about how to handle life. And yet for each person, they were able to somehow keep going. I believe that by worshiping together today, we are all acting as resilient cycle breakers, because we are declaring that the hardships of our past do not control or define us. They will not stop us from being here, aspiring to be better people. They will not prevent us from making the world a better place as a community. And our past will not extinguish the hope of our faith that declares that any hardship, even death itself, will not be the final part of our story. Every Sunday that we gather, we have no idea what the people around us or watching on their screens have gone through in the week before. And when we leave, we have no clue what we're going to experience in the week ahead. But no matter what is happening in the present or what will happen in the future, my prayer for us today is that we might have the resilience of Joseph to keep going, even if it doesn't work out the way that we want it to. If you have been frustrated by a broken relationship, keep going. If you have been debilitated by mental health challenges, keep going. If you are confused about what to do next in the next chapter of your life, keep going. If you're feeling worn out today, just keep going. If your own health is failing or you're serving as a caretaker, keep going. If you're grieving the loss of something right now, it's okay. Grief is good, and you can keep going. If you're feeling held captive by the toxicity or trauma of your past, keep going. If you are feeling that you are inadequate in any way, keep going. If life isn't the perfect vision that you had for yourself, keep going. No matter what, keep going. And know that this church and the God that we worship goes with you. Amen.